Welcome to the What Really Happened radio show. Because World War III is a really bad idea. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show today. It is Tuesday, August 4th, 2015. We've got a lot of stuff to talk about today. The phone lines are open. 877-300-7645, 877-300-7645. Tom is in our control room, twiddling the dials, keeping us out of trouble, ready to answer the phones when you call on in. And let's see what we've got going on here. A lot of interesting developments all of a sudden taking place over in Russia. The Russian ambassador is now accusing Great Britain of attempting to surreptitiously squeeze out Russian diplomats to get them out of the country. And obviously the reason for doing this is to not have anybody in country who can argue for Russia's point of view about various issues like Ukraine and the sanctions and so forth. And we see this kind of silencing of opposing points of view all the time. Remember, just before 9/11, the FBI was going all over the United States of America, shutting down the websites of Muslim charities, so that when 9/11 happened, there were no voices out there that could say, hey, let's look carefully at this and not just accept the official story. So that's a little bit of a row going over there. And there's a kind of a little tit-for-tat going on about this because the Swedish Foreign Ministry is confirming the expulsion of their diplomat from Russia, which is going to strain the relations there. They've declared this diplomat who worked at the Swedish Embassy in Moscow persona non grata, which is kind of a catch-all term for, we caught you doing something you're not supposed to be doing, but we're not going to go into details. Usually it is something that happens when a foreign diplomat is actually a covered intelligence agent and gets caught doing what intelligence agents do. Now, a little bit of good news. Russia apparently succeeded in putting together a high-level meeting between Syria and Saudi Arabia. Al-Assad's security advisor met with Saudi Deputy Crown Prince, and once again, Putin proves to be a global statesman. He's out there trying to calm everything down. He's trying to build peaceful alliances. At the same time, the U.S. and NATO are out there saying, bombing everybody's going to solve all of our problems. Now, Russia did not take such a gentle high road regarding Turkey. Now, as you probably remember, Syria hosts a major Russian Navy base in the Mediterranean. And Putin has basically addressed the Turkish envoy, telling him that he should tell Erdogan that he can go to heck along with all his ISIS terrorists. So Putin is aware, as we all are, that ISIS or ISIL or whatever they're calling themselves this week is actually a covert front working for the aggressor nations as a proxy army or as a straw man excuse to invade countries that haven't actually done anything wrong with them. And I guess Putin's kind of losing his patience there. Now, Sergei Lavrov is out there saying if it was not for Russia's help to Syria and Iraq, ISIS would have made even more gains. Now, we know that ISIS in Syria is actually fighting against Assad on behalf of Israel and the United States of America. And ISIS in Iraq appears to be set up as an excuse for the U.S. to go in and re-invade Iraq for a third time because those pesky conquered Iraqi people will not sit still with their U.S. puppet rulers. So a little bit of game playing, but it's all falling apart now. It's all falling apart. There is apparently a report that British SAS troops have been caught inside Syria fighting Assad. Now, the official statement by the British government is SAS forces are in Syria fighting against ISIS. But we are getting multiple reports from many military sources, this is coming out of Global Research, saying these British SAS forces are dressed up as ISIS rebels. They're wearing the black suits, they're waving the black flags, and they're actually carrying out attacks on Assad. And there's nothing new with that. Remember, after the fall of Baghdad, following the second invasion of Iraq, and some of the British SAS were caught dressed in Arab clothing, driving a car filled with bombs. They were arrested by the Baghdad police. The British Army literally attacked the Baghdad police station and blew a hole in the wall to rescue these guys before they could blow the whistle on what it was they were really doing. So they're back to their little games again of, I'm ISIS, I'm the bad guy, come and hate me. It really is. It's all a gigantic hoax. It is a fake. It is a fraud. Now, as the sanctions argument escalates, Russia is announcing they're going to expand the list of countries covered by their counter-sanctions. They're basically doing a little tit-for-tat. Every time the West hits Russia with more sanctions, Russia will respond in kind with sanctions heading back. It's an economic war. And unfortunately, economic wars are usually the doormat to a real shooting war, which is kind of heating up all over the place. The Ukrainian army has violated the ceasefire, the Minsk agreement, 45 times over the past 24 hours, according to the Donetsk People's Republic Defense Ministry. Apparently, they're using heavy artillery, 216 122 millimeter, 152 millimeter artillery shells into their territory. And they're hitting civilian structures. They're not picking militarily significant targets. They're just shooting up the place to punish those eastern Ukrainians for refusing to live under the perpetual slavery of the European Central Bank, the IMF, and various other assorted money junkies here. Now, there is a group that is working to try and implement the Minsk agreement. It's called the Ukraine Contact Group, and they have a subgroup on security. They have been continuing negotiations in Minsk. The sticking point is that Kiev is refusing to recall their heavy weapons from the contact line. And whatever the Western media is trying to tell you about this is all Putin and Russia's fault, Russia put together the Minsk agreement. Kiev is refusing to comply. They're keeping their heavy weapons at the contact line. They're continuing to shell the eastern Ukrainian republics. The shellings will continue until morale approves. Now, we're getting a very interesting story out of Fakti.org. Apparently, the eastern Ukrainian republics are of the opinion Kiev is going to crash very soon. They're hovering at the edge of default. They're being kept alive with billions of new instantly created euros being poured all over them by the ECB and the IMF, trying to prop them up any way possible. Quite a contrast to the way Greece was being treated. But they're still in serious trouble. They're dealing with a possible internal military coup. The former ousted government of Ukraine has now formed a government in exile with the goal of liberating Ukraine from their foreign puppet rulers. And as a result, the eastern Ukrainian republics are making preparations to issue Russian passports. And apparently this is being done in cooperation. In the event of a crash of Ukraine, the eastern Ukrainian republics are going to do what Crimea did. They want to merge with the Russian republics, and Putin isn't asking them to, but he's not going to say no. And they're already out there getting ready to issue these passports. That's how convinced they are that Kiev is in serious trouble. And they are. They're in serious trouble. And if Kiev falls, the whole U.S. plan of covert overthrow to control the world starts to fall apart. I think it's already falling apart. It started falling apart in 1979 with the Iranian Revolution, where they kicked out their U.S. puppet ruler, the Shah. Because everybody understands this is how the U.S. has been building their empire, quietly, covertly, behind the scenes, and now that everybody knows that's what's going on, it simply is not going to work any longer. All right, we got to take a break for commercials, and we'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. Now, interesting interview with Paul Craig Roberts, not here in the U.S., or not seen here in the U.S. This is another one from Fakti.org, where Paul Craig Roberts is saying that the U.S. government is engaging in a deliberate plan to try and wreck relations between Russia and China in order to resubjugate Russia to the will of the United States of America. And this is a very stupid plan for a couple of reasons. One, Russia and China know that's what the U.S. is trying to do. And two, even if Russia and China were not on speaking terms, it's not going to make Russia more amenable to going back under U.S. Western financial control, because they're seeing how much better their life is having public control of the public currency. But there seems to be a lot of, in my opinion, badly flawed thinking coming out of Washington, D.C. over the last couple of decades. I don't know, maybe they're all doped up on prescription antidepressants, or maybe there's something in the water, but they don't seem to be thinking clearly or accurately. If anything, they seem to be going in with whatever they hope is going to happen, whatever they wish will happen. Oh, we're going to launch Obamacare, and we just hope it'll be working okay. And that's not the kind of thinking you want to have running an entire nation, especially one armed with nuclear weapons. We're going to grab ourselves a phone call. Mo in Florida. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Michael. Thanks for taking my call. I think this thing with Syria is finally, I saw where Kerry was saying that Syria is not a legitimate government and they better watch out. Now this, I watched Ashton Carter there, the defense secretary, saying that yes, we're bombing and supporting the rebels, and he admitted we really don't know who we're bombing when we're supporting them. This Syria thing is, I don't know where Putin's at on this thing. I don't know if this is all a front by him and he's one of the elites getting along, but if he's not, I don't think he's going to put up with this taking Assad out, and I just wanted to...
Yeah, I'm in agreement with you, because that Russian Navy base in Syria is about the only one they really have left on the Mediterranean operating today. Now, they've made arrangements to use Crimea and other areas, and of course, they still have their Black Sea ports in... Cyprus. No, I'm sorry. They've contracted for new port facilities in Cyprus. They have their ports in the Black Sea on Crimea, where they can just come down through the Bosphorus and project power that way. But yeah, we're reaching the point where Russia's strategic long-term interests are now under attack by the United States. And what's going on in Syria is there was a major setback not too long ago, where the Assad forces were able to rout out a whole bunch of ISIS Al-Qaeda, who are actually working for the United States of America. And the very next day we get this idea that this report, Obama is authorizing airstrikes in defense of the rebels. And what's going on is they have been trying to get Assad out of there for 4 years. And it's part of that larger plan of conquering covertly all the Middle East oil-producing nations, to get them to sell their oil only for the U.S. dollar, to accept private central banking, to accept basically Western financial hegemonic domination. And it's not going very well. And they've been trying to sell the idea that the U.S. and European intervention in Syria was to fight the evil ISIS. Well, now we know ISIS is a faked group. I mean, we've got the SAS, the British SAS, running around Syria dressed as ISIS, waving the flag, saying, "We're ISIS, mate." And they're attacking Assad's forces. I think probably Washington, D.C. has given up trying to bamboozle the American people about what's really going on, and they're saying, look, we know we have to invade Syria. We're going to invade Syria. The American people aren't going to like it, but too gosh darn bad. And that seems to be where we are, because in the space of only a few weeks, you know, ISIS has gone from being this horrible, brutal enemy we should all be afraid of to being the guy that the U.S. is serving as their Air Force right now.
So what do you think? What do you think Putin will do? They take Assad out.
I don't think it's going to get quite that far. I think what Putin is going to do is he's going to use the U.S. propaganda against the U.S. government and say, look, you're telling me that you are on the side of, you know, the rebels here. You know, it's gotten so confused, it's really hard to say. But Russia is, in fact, supporting Assad against the ISIS terrorists. And I think what Putin is going to say is, look, you keep telling us that you're in Syria to fight Al-Qaeda and ISIS. We're there in Syria next to you, shoulder to shoulder, to help Assad kill the people you say are the bad guys. And that may be another reason why the U.S. and Great Britain are like saying, yeah, you got us, we're actually ISIS, in order to deny Putin that propaganda tactic.
I hope you're right. I hope it doesn't turn into a...
Unfortunately, the U.S. government and NATO and the money junkies have gone so far down this path to this war over whose ink and paper we're going to use for the next 100 years. They can't turn around now. They can't quit without immediately collapsing the entire Western economy, which is being held up with this promise of a huge payday on the far side of all the bloodshed. They've gone past the point of no return. They can't just say, all right, you're right, we were just trying to conquer these people and take their wealth without destroying themselves. And unfortunately, I do think that barring a crash of the American economy, which would bring all of this nonsense to an end, the U.S. is going to keep on provoking until they get shooting wars with Russia and China, because that's what they want. And they don't care how many millions of your children have to die in it or be crippled in it. It's, not too great a price to pay for the domination of the dollar over the world for the next century.
Thanks, Mike.
All right. We're going to let you go. Yeah, unfortunately, I mean, it is getting so confusing because the propaganda is just changing every 2 days. Remember in 1984, right in the middle of a broadcast about the war against Oceania, and East Asia is our friend, and then all of a sudden, right in the middle, they switch. And the one we were fighting yesterday is now our ally, and the one who was our ally yesterday, we're fighting them now. And they try and cover it up and say, oh no, we've always been at war with Oceania. I don't know what's wrong with you thinking that our enemy used to be East Asia. They just did exactly the same thing with ISIS. Oh, ISIS is our friend. Of course we're supporting them. All those videos about beheadings and burning people, and that was all fake stuff anyway. We're going to take another break for commercials, and we'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. Now, over at wakeupfromyourslumber.com, they have a good article worth reading. It's called Washington's Fifth Columns Inside Russia and China. And they're basically talking about how over the last 2 decades, Russia and China and pretty much the rest of the world have come to understand that these pro-democracy and human rights organizations operating within their countries were actually covert, subversive organizations funded by the U.S. Department of State, private American foundations, and intelligence agencies. And the real purpose of these agencies, these non-governmental organizations, despite their lofty-sounding names, we are pro-democracy, we are, human rights, whatever they call themselves. It's there to enforce Washington's hegemony by destabilizing any country capable of resisting U.S. control. And now everybody knows that's what's going on. And more countries, including Russia and China, are starting to kick these organizations out as subversive groups. Noam Chomsky had a cool video, we linked to it the other day at WhatReallyHappened.com, where he's giving a lecture saying that you need to understand the words you are being told by the government and the media don't mean what you think they mean. When the government and the media says pro-democracy, what they're really saying is imposition of U.S. control. The U.S. only supports democracy when the people are voting for what the government wants in the first place. Now, AIPAC in this final fistfight, this barroom brawl over the Iran deal, AIPAC is taking all of the freshman members of Congress, except for 3, to Israel for a grand tour. They're going to see the Holocaust Museum. They're going to talk to Benjamin Netanyahu. They're going to be wined and dined and videotaped with the new Christian Dior model in a compromising situation, or small boys or goats or household appliances or whatever it takes. And these freshman members of Congress, except for 3, think this is really cool. Yeah, we're going to get a trip to Israel here. And my opinion is that every member of Congress who sets foot on that plane to Israel needs to be voted out of office next election. They have no business going to Israel. Their business is in Washington, D.C. in the United States of America. And look how eager they are. Oh, yes, I'm on Israel's favorite list. I get to ride the airplane. I get to steal ashtrays and bring them home as souvenirs. Going into this next election, all of you need to keep something in mind, and you need to tell this to everybody you know. Your friends, your family, your coworkers. No government can serve two masters. And a government that serves Israel cannot, does not, and will not serve the American people. A friend of Israel is no friend of America. And in these dark times, America needs leaders who will put America first, second, and third. We need to get our government back. We have a puppet ruler in Washington, D.C., no different than the U.S. puppet rulers in Baghdad or Tripoli or any of the other places. What the U.S. has done to these other countries, Israel has done to us. Now, Ernest Moniz, who's the U.S. Energy Secretary, and he was one of the key negotiators with Iran, is out there writing an editorial saying, if I were Israeli, I would support the Iran deal. And he says, it's time to address Israel's fears of the nuclear accord. Well, Ernest has kind of missed what's going on. Israel is not afraid of the Iran nuclear accord. Israel's a nuclear-armed state, the only one in that part of the world. What Israel wants is what they already got with Iraq, for Iran to be smashed into rubble by American military forces. And the Iran nuclear deal is just getting in the way. That's why we want this deal killed. We want the war now. We have to have it here. And it's time to bring up a major issue. This is over in the Real News, and we've been talking about it. It's time to quit pretending that Israel is not a nuclear-armed state. And Israel's nuclear weapons are a major factor in any kind of arms negotiations in the region. And the U.S. government keeps going on in and saying, well, we're going to pretend that Israel is this poor, weak, helpless nation in need of, hundreds of billions of U.S. taxpayer dollars in weapons to protect themselves from the evil Muslim empire that is trying to eat them. And everybody else going in there knows this is an absolute complete joke. Washington, D.C. is living in la-la land. Israel is a nuclear-armed nation. They got their first round of weapons-grade uranium from the NUMEX facility in Philadelphia. They got more from Oak Ridge. Big scandal there. Recently declassified documents demonstrate the U.S. has helped Israel develop hydrogen bombs, the big ones that eat entire cities in a single blinding flash of light. Documents from the former government of South Africa confirm Israel was out there trying to sell nuclear weapons to other countries, the very activity the Non-Proliferation Treaty is supposed to prevent. Everybody knows it. And the U.S. government just goes on, oh, no, we're going to do the negotiations like poor little Israel is helpless and weak, and we've got to take care of them no matter how much it costs the American people. And it's nonsense. Now, there's another article over at whowhatwhy.org that's cutting right to the chase. Iran is not the biggest nuclear cheat in this discussion. It's the United States that has consistently violated their treaty obligations, in particular the Non-Proliferation Treaty. Because everything Iran is doing, they're allowed to do under the Non-Proliferation Treaty, which Iran has signed and ratified, the U.S. has signed and ratified, Israel refuses. And under Article 4 of the Non-Proliferation Treaty, the United States is obligated to go into Iran and help them build nuclear power stations, medical isotope factories, any other industrial peaceful application. And if you're in there laying foundations and running the wiring, then you've got to guarantee there isn't a bomb factory in the basement of the Iranian nuclear power station the way there is down in Dimona, in Israel. But the U.S. ignored that. They don't want proof Iran isn't building nuclear weapons. They want to scare everybody that Iran is building nuclear weapons to justify another war of conquest. That's what's going on here. And by using the threat of military force or sanctions, to coerce Iran into surrendering their rights under the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. It is the United States government that is in violation of international law. It's the United States government that has gone rogue, that is not playing by the rules. Iran is not the cheat here. The U.S. is, at the request of Almighty Israel. We're going to grab a real quick phone call here before the commercial break. Steve in Idaho, aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. Thanks for taking my call. I just wanted to talk about Donald Trump real quick a little bit. I heard you yesterday, I believe, say something about to the effect that Trump couldn't be bought by Israel or something like that.
Well, he can't be bought by anybody. He's using his own money. And yes, I know Trump has made statements supportive of Israel. All politicians have to do it. But he's not doing those deep tongue kissings that we see from, like, Hillary Clinton or Mike Huckabee or Jeb Bush. So,
are you aware that his daughter Ivanka is Jewish?
You know, my first wife was Jewish. It's really kind of hard to read anything into that at all. Thank you very much. We're going to let you go and take a commercial break. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. Now, down in Israel not too long ago, they had this horrible tragedy where Jewish illegal settlers set fire to a Palestinian home, trying to drive them out, take their land, and an 18-month-old baby was burned to death. Other members of the family also seriously burned. And Israel cried a bunch of crocodile tears about, oh, how terrible this was, but did absolutely nothing about it. And that now there's been an arrest, supposedly, of the grandson of Herb Kaahumanu, who was a historical terrorist in Israel's history. But apparently the settlers showed up again and attacked the crops of the village, because the house fire failed to drive them out. And apparently the attack took place at the village of El Magir in the occupied West Bank. And they were burning olive trees and other crops. More than 50 olive trees were burned down. The reason that's significant, you need to understand that olive trees take a long time to mature. When you plant an olive tree today, it will be 10 years before you will get a useful crop off of it. It's not like some food plants where you plant it today and then next spring you've got a crop. Olives take a very long time to mature and produce useful crop. Meanwhile, leading House Republican and Democrat introduce anti-boycott resolution. We will make it illegal to boycott Israel. The problem with that, of course, is boycotts are recognized, non-violent forms of protest protected as free speech under the First Amendment to the Constitution of the United States of America. So we have these two, and I use the term loosely, gentlemen, Ed Royce and Elliot Engel, who are perfectly willing to subvert the Constitution of the United States of America and the Bill of Rights to please their masters in Israel. And like all other representatives, they are up for re-election next year. Take note of their names and make sure they get kicked out. Ed Royce is a Republican from California. Engel is a Democrat from New York. But they all ought to be put on a plane for Tel Aviv one way. It's time to take all of these Israel firsters in the U.S. government, crate them up, drill some air holes, put them on a ship, send them over there. It's time to get rid of them. Washington, D.C. is in dire need of an enema at this point. Now, here's an interesting development. Saudi Defense Minister Mohammed bin Salman threatened to launch war on Kuwait after differences between the two Persian states escalated over the Khashoggi oil field. Now, this is interesting. This puts the U.S. government in a little bit of a pickle, because the first invasion of Iraq began when Saddam Hussein, encouraged by April Glaspie, speaking on behalf of the U.S. government, invaded Kuwait over allegations that Kuwait, actually a U.S. company in Kuwait, was slant drilling under the border into Iraq's oil fields. The resulting war was sold to the American people with that hoax about stolen incubators, where the daughter of the Kuwait ambassador to the U.S. went on TV claiming to be a nurse from Kuwait, and they took the incubators, they left the babies on the floor to die. Really? How about picking them up and wrapping them in a blanket? And that was a giant hoax put together by Hill and Knowlton Public Relations, because that's what public relations is, lying to the public for money. That's what the job description is. So, either the U.S. is going to have to simply abandon Kuwait and say, well, this time it just wasn't important, or they're going to have to angle and declare war on Saudi Arabia. And I wouldn't rule out that latter one. We've been hearing a lot of Saudi bashing in the media. And even though Saudi Arabia thinks that they and the U.S. are loyal allies, it's only a matter of time before the U.S. turns on Saudi Arabia and conquers them for a couple of reasons. One, Saudi Arabia's oil must be sold only for the U.S. dollar, and Saudi Arabia is starting to pull at that petrodollar leash. Second, the U.S. owes Saudi Arabia huge amounts of money, which can be erased at the point of a bayonet. And now we're seeing this interesting little story that prior to becoming king, the Salman, and yes, it's a name we hear a lot of because it's family-dominated politics, sort of like the Bushes and the Clintons. But the former U.S. ambassador to Saudi Arabia was talking to the man who is now king of Saudi Arabia right after 9/11. And Saudi King Salman said there is no question in his mind Israel was behind 9/11. And that's going to put him on Israel and the U.S. special high-interest targets list. Nobody's buying the official 9/11 story anymore. It's rather amazing to see the U.S. government continue to stand up there, unrepentant, unashamed, trying to maintain this huge collection of lies they've accumulated through the ages. Torpedoes in the Gulf of Tonkin, Spanish mine in Havana Harbor, Lusitania not carrying weapons. Bad weather is why the Israel attacked the USS Liberty. Saddam had nuclear weapons. Assad has gas weapons. Humans are warming the earth. Obamacare's website works. How many more times are you going to have to be lied to before you will stand up and understand you live with a government that controls you through lies, fraud, and deception, and it's time to get angry about that? Is that the kind of a country you want your children to grow up in, where the government and the media just lie to them to get their money, obedience, send them off to wars? Are you really that insensitive to what kind of a life the next generation is going to have that you're comfortable with that? I'm not. I'm not fortunate enough to have children. I have to be Uncle Mike to all the neighbors' kids. But I hold it as the highest moral imperative for all of us that we leave to our next generation a better world than that which was left to us. And sadly, my generation has failed miserably at that. And I'm asking those of you who are 20, 30 years younger than I am not to repeat that failure. Now, turning to the economic news, the CEO of the collapsed Bitcoin exchange Mt. Gox has been arrested in Japan, Mark Karpelès, CEO, and he's basically dealing with the loss or misplacement or theft of $390 million worth of Bitcoins. Now, Karpelès, he's 30 years old. He's suspected of basically having hacked into the computer system of the exchange and falsified the data, which means nobody knows where any of this stuff went. Needless to say, the money junkies are out there saying, see, this proves Bitcoin isn't viable. You know, it's untrustworthy. You should only live with our ink and paper debt notices. But the problem isn't the currency itself. The problem are the money junkies who seek to control, corrupt, and steal any currency, no matter what form it's in. Look at the massive fraud in the conventional banking system. LIBOR, gold price suppression. You can't say that Bitcoin is somehow singled out because this CEO got arrested. He should have been arrested. But the problem isn't the currency, it's the guy, it's the criminal. And it's another reason why the public currency of any nation should not be entrusted to a private bunch of greedy bastards. Turning on down to Puerto Rico, they're technically in default. They're not calling it default. They're calling it a payment moratorium on the bondholders in order to not have to pay off on the derivatives. And they're analyzing what went wrong with Puerto Rico, and they're pointing the finger of blame at these hedge funds, which helped wreck Puerto Rico's economy, and now, of course, the poor people of Puerto Rico are paying the price, because that's how it always works, whether it's Puerto Rico or Europe or the United States. The money junkies scam billions of dollars for themselves and then dump the losses on ordinary people. That is economic fascism when that is being done. When government and corporate financial interests are aligned together against the general population, that is fascism. That's not my definition. That's Benito Mussolini, who won the Olympic gold medal for being a fascist jerk, along with some lead that came along a little bit later. Alrighty, down in Venezuela, food shortages are so severe, the looting is ongoing and turning deadly. That will happen here for those who are not prepared to deal with the coming crash. We're going to take a break for our news, and we'll be right back. Hi, America. Welcome back to our show. Hour number 2. The phone lines are open. 877-300-7645. 877-300-7645. Tom is still in our control room, hand hovering over the receiver, ready to swoop on down and put you on the air. All righty. Now, getting on back to the economic news, kind of an interesting development, because now we're getting word that Russia and Qatar are going to coordinate their activities in the energy sphere. Remember, Qatar is this repressive regime that the U.S. is giving them weapons to crush down their people because Qatar is such a loyal partner with the United States. And all of a sudden, they're out making deals with Russia. That's going to significantly change the dynamic over there. Probably the U.S. is going to turn around and say, Qatar is oppressing their people. We have to bring democracy and human rights to Qatar. And they'll try and replace the government, as they have done so many others. The problem is everybody understands that's what the U.S. has been doing. Now, yesterday we mentioned that word from here on the island of Oahu, where they're actually having the negotiations for the Trans-Pacific Partnership, the negotiations have slammed into a brick wall over a great many of the issues related to protecting intellectual property rights of American corporations. A big one is the ban on GMO labeling, which would reverse existing laws in many of these Asian nations. And they don't like to do that because they lose face. And everybody would understand, oh, the Americans made them change the GMO labeling issue. So we're seeing this article over here in Blacklisted News where the U.S. is renewing their push for the Trans-Pacific Partnership. They're out here probably with more lobbyists and more money and more arm twisting and more blackmail and whatever else it's going to take here. But as of the last word I had, it's not going too well. Apparently one of the other sticking points they have is this idea of outlawing what are called generic prescription drugs. Now, the way the system would work, remember I was talking yesterday about the original idea of a patent is it opened up a window of exclusivity, so if you invented something, you and you alone would profit from it for a certain set period of time. Then the patent would expire, and the technology would become part of the public domain to benefit society as a whole. Now, when the big pharmaceutical corporations come out with a new drug, they'll patent it, they'll trade name it, they'll advertise it like crazy on TV. The U.S. is only one of 3 industrialized nations that allow advertising for prescription medications on TV. And then they would make their money back, and then the patent would expire, and other companies could start making that medication under what is called the generic heading. And the generic medications are much less expensive. But the big pharmaceutical companies want to ban generics. They're trying to figure out ways they can extend their patents and guarantee a market exclusivity for their custom designer drugs, many of which are addictive and cause even more deaths than the illicit drugs afflicting our country. And apparently a big part of the Trans-Pacific Partnership is demanding that other nations signing this agreement enforce American permanent patents on medication and not allow generics. So basically it's a one-sided deal. The U.S. is trying to lock in the current economic status quo with the Trans-Pacific Partnership and the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership before the U.S. economy collapses any further and people just start going off their own way. They can't bring the world back to Bretton Woods and the petrodollar by force of arms, so they're going to try and do it with treaties. And it's stalled, is the last word I got. Now then, it is August 4th, 2 days away from the anniversary of the bombing of Hiroshima. Selfridges has launched their Christmas shopping season with just 142 shopping days to go before Christmas. They are really desperate. And I got to tell you, when I was a kid, Christmas basically started on Thanksgiving, only because the Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade said it did. Around our home, Christmas was something that's really cranked up just 2 weeks before, middle of December. A big reason being that back then Christmas trees were something you went out into the forest and cut down, and they're not going to last much longer than 2 weeks anyway. And yes, I'm old enough to have seen Christmas trees that had candles rather than electric lights on them, which is something else that can be very risky with a dead, drying piece of lumber in the living room. So that was it. And it made it feel like a celebration. You're in the middle of winter, it's all the snow and ice and cold, and the charm and novelty has worn off, and then all of a sudden you've got colored lights and decorations in the middle of winter, and it felt special. The way it's handled in the United States now, where they're literally getting the Christmas stuff out there in the middle of summer. By the time Christmas actually gets here, I'm burned out. I'm in full-on Scrooge mode. Ah, humbug. If I could work my will, every idiot that goes about with Merry Christmas on his lips would be boiled in his own pudding and buried with a stake of holly through his heart. I really do feel like that way, because I get sick of it. And by the time we actually get to Christmas, it's no longer decorations, it's decor, and very, very tacky. But the retailers are desperate to drag people back into the shopping malls with this obligation that the only way you can prove your worth as a human being is to max out the credit cards on a bunch of stuff you're going to give to people that they will just put in the closet and never use anyway. The Christmas shopping season accounts for 1/3 of all retail profits for the entire year, and that's why they're stretching it out. And I'm almost willing to wager a plugged Turkish piaster at this point that the next time Claire and I go on down to the local Sam's, the Christmas stuff will be on display. And I find it absolutely nauseating. I mean, we've already been seeing the Halloween costumes on display there. 2 weeks ago, as a matter of fact, we noticed that. The Halloween costumes are out there. Get ready for Halloween. And it's almost interesting where we'll be either at Sam's or at the local Safeway, and they have a big shelf of the holiday supplies where they're competing with each other. You know, there's Thanksgiving over here, and then here's the Halloween stuff, and they're going to shove the Christmas stuff on down here. And I don't think it's going to work, certainly based on the retail numbers for the last several Christmas seasons. They're burning people out on it. It ceases to be something special when it is just shoved in your face for months on end. And I have to admit, I got spoiled for Christmas in America forever, because many years ago in the 1980s, I got to spend Christmas in Europe, specifically in Munich, Germany. And there was the snow festival in the Marienplatz and all the little booths with handmade things and people just walking around giving out little treats to total strangers, choirs singing, and it looked and felt like the stories of Christmas I'd read in books but never actually seen on the streets of America. And that was the only Christmas that really felt the way I thought Christmas was supposed to feel, where it is a celebration and not just another marketing opportunity for the owners of the giant retail corporations. We'll shame those people into spending the last of their pennies on these little foil things we got from China. So I'm not sure if it's a new record, August 3rd, for the start of the holiday shopping season, but it's certainly not a record I would want to be connected with, certainly would not be proud of. I don't know. All right, this is the start of the WhatReallyHappened.com Christmas shopping season. We don't have anything for you to buy, but we'll put up some decorations. What can I tell you? All righty, when we come back from this next commercial break, we're going to be talking about politics, and we're going to segue into the commercial break, talking about the incredible bias in funding. Right now, just 400 families in America represent half of all the money raised by the 2016 presidential candidates so far. You don't count anymore. You're not in the club, as George Carlin used to say. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're going to go right to the phones here real quick. Lonnie in Pennsylvania. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. It's Glenn from Pennsylvania. Hi.
Glenn from Pennsylvania.
Yeah,
I gotta buy Tom a new keyboard because his keyboard's getting more and more creative.
No, I was wearing my Bluetooth when the call first picked up, and then I went to the phone. So that was probably the result of the Bluetooth. Yeah. Yeah. So I'm calling to respectfully suggest that you put your bumper music where your mouth is and kind of squeeze jolly old St. Nicholas into the lineup. You know, we can have Christmas in August.
Well, we do have our special selection of Christmas bump music, most of which is, in fact, all of which is created by my lovely wife, Claire, for her album, Christmas Without Borders. So there, I'm now officially in the Christmas. We do have something to sell. We've got my wife's Christmas music album to sell. It's over.
There you go. You can start hawking that now.
It's on iTunes.
I remember when Christmas in July was a joke, the sales, it was a sale joke, you know. Now it's like the reality.
Yeah, I remember, I think three years ago, the Sam's Club did have the stuff for Christmas launched in July. And they may have it up, and I just didn't see it this last time that we were there, because I wasn't looking, you know. But, it is rather absurd.
You know, it used to be Crazy Eddie's Christmas in July sale, you know, and it's like, hey, you had to be crazy to do that. Now it's like everywhere, so. You know, there's nothing terribly apocalyptic going on today. You know, it's not, you know, it's a slow news day in a sense. Things are,
they got a real serious, cyclone hitting Asia right now, huge storm. We dodged ours. I'm going to be, talking about that a little bit later in the show.
I'm still waiting to see what happens with the Pacific Rim, you know, earthquake activity seems to settle down a little bit. You know,
it comes and goes. I mean, we were keeping an eye on Mount Cleveland because if that triggers a major undersea event, you know, we'll get the tsunami here on Oahu. Not that I'm personally worried about it. Claire and I, we live way high up on a hill, but, you know, we get to look down and watch everybody else get washed away. Call Maui, tell them to pick it out when they go bobbing by.
I guess Mount Cleveland doesn't just rock, it blows.
Okay.
All right, take care. Bye-bye.
All right, thanks an awful lot there. Yes, we do have something to sell for this early Christmas season, my wife's album, Christmas Without Borders. All righty, now then, getting on back to economy and oligarchy and all these people are coming out and saying, it's time to stop pretending that the United States is some kind of a republic with pretensions of democracy in the elections. We have descended into full-on fascist oligarchy. Now, Bernie Sanders, who is out there making Hillary Clinton a little nervous, not as nervous as Joe Biden, but a little nervous, is out there reviving an idea that was raised back in the 1970s, basically saying that how we get the big money influence out of our major elections is to have a single public fund where anybody who can qualify as a candidate gets an equal share of that money in order to restore the elections to being contests about ideas that appeal to the maximum number of voters rather than people writing gigantic checks for intrusive advertising campaigns that just wear you down until you push the button you're supposed to push. Now, Bernie Sanders is floating the idea. It will go absolutely nowhere because the money junkies in this country have spent billions of dollars buying the country for themselves, and they're not going to give it up without a fight. No more than the nobility of France were willing to give up their power and control right up to the moment they saw that guillotine in front of them. At which point they said, you know, maybe a republic would be a good idea. All righty. Now, let's see, getting on further down here. Slouching toward Bedlam. This is an article coming out of crooksandliars.com, and they're talking about the upcoming Fox News debate on Thursday and all the machinations regarding which 10 candidates will be allowed to take part in the debate, because if they lined up all of the current GOP candidates, they'd basically get to the end of the introductions and say, I'm sorry, we're out of time, tune in again next week. So they're out there shuffling them around. We know who the presumptive participants are going to be. There's some still on the borderline. And for those who don't make that cut of the 10, they're pretty much assumed to be out of the race and just looking for a place to fall down. Needless to say, there's a lot of gnashing of teeth and wailing, I should be in, you should be in. And exactly how the 10 are going to be selected is very tight secret right now. They're basically, Fox News says they're going out to various polls. They're not saying which polls they're going to use. But what we're seeing here is the Murdochizing of the next election, where Fox will decide who's in and who's out. They'd like to get Trump out. They really can't figure out a good way to do that. Fox also gets to choose the questions, so we'll get a lot of questions about bombing Iran or bombing Syria, and probably none about immigration whatsoever, because they get to set the agenda. And the agenda is going to be to keep Trump quiet, off to one side, and let the war hawks dominate. And we all know that's what they're doing. Now, earlier today, just to show you how desperate Fox News is, they ran a story where they did a poll of GOP voters asking who they would never, ever consider voting for. And they managed to come up with 33% of GOP voters said they would never vote for Trump. Absolutely not. Huzzah, huzzah, we have a bad number for Donald Trump. And they're putting it out there basically saying, well, we should just eject him now because he's clearly unelectable. If 1/3 of the GOP voters say they'll never vote for him, we should just get rid of him now. And it just underscores how desperate they are to get rid of Trump. Because he's not going to play the game by their rules. He's not going to do what the money junkies tell him to do, because he's a money junkie himself. He's got his own money. He doesn't need to whore himself to anybody. And that's why he's stirring up trouble. He's able to go on out there and talk about what he, Donald Trump, feels it's important to talk about, because he doesn't have somebody pulling his leash saying, no, just go over and talk about gay marriage or something. And Trump has succeeded in tapping into this incredible discontent in the American people. We're sick and tired of politics as usual. And we put up with it under the illusion that they're all the same. They're all going to be the same. And then all of a sudden this guy shows up who isn't the same. And I'm not saying that he's an honest man or a decent man or a good man. He probably isn't, looking at some of the things he did to become rich. But he's different. He's an option. And he's talking about things that really are important to the American people, and the American people are flocking to him. And he represents a threat not just to the entrenched GOP party apparatus, but to the entrenched power as a whole that has gone as far as it's gone on this idea of things are not going to get any better, so stop trying to make it happen. Now all of a sudden, it looks like that iron-fisted grip by the money junkies on our nation is beginning to slip. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. Now, we've been reporting on how finally, after all these years, they actually sent one of these crooked financial guys to prison for 14 years for his part in rigging the LIBOR. Not anywhere near long enough sentence. The punishment should fit the crime. I mean, if you go to a convenience store and you steal $30, $40, you're going away to prison for 15, 20 years. This guy was part of a group that stole hundreds of millions of dollars. And he alone is going away for 14 years, and so far, none of his associates, including his superiors, have even been investigated. And the reality is, despite all the revelations of massive fraud going on, statistics from the U.S. Department of Justice show that prosecution for financial crime is at a 20-year low. It's declined more than 1/3 since the middle of the Clinton administration, which is when the decline first began. Clinton gets into office, and all of a sudden, we don't prosecute Wall Street people anymore. We just don't do that. They're such generous campaign donors. Really, they are. And, of course, we're still looking at the aftermath of this story where Hillary Clinton, as Secretary of State, intervened on behalf of the Swiss bank UBS during the IRS and Department of Justice attempt to find American tax dodgers who had Swiss bank accounts. And the Department of Justice and the IRS demanded the Swiss bank UBS turn over 52,000 accounts belonging to very wealthy Americans who were hiding money there to not pay taxes on it. Because of Hillary Clinton's intervention, UBS ultimately turned over only 4,450 accounts, less than 10%. The other 90% got off scot-free. And after that, UBS started funneling all kinds of money to the Clintons through their charity. They paid Bill Clinton $1.5 million for speaking gigs. You know, I think my price for a speech right now is $4.73 plus gas money. It's amazing here. Now then, we have been talking about this lady, Huma Abedin. She's a longtime associate of Hillary Clinton. They go back about 20 years. She's the wife of former Congressman Anthony Weiner, who was driven from public life because of his sexting habit. And apparently this Huma Abedin has ties to the Muslim Brotherhood that we're being told are a bunch of bad people. Huma has been joking that Hillary is going to make her the first lady if Hillary wins the White House. We hope she's joking. But apparently, Senator Chuck Grassley is raising the issue that while Huma Abedin was working for Hillary Clinton at the State Department, she appeared to be delivering favors for friends outside, former employers. And apparently Abedin allegedly sent or received more than 7,000 emails on her government email account that involved a gentleman named Band, Douglas Band, who's a longtime aide to Bill Clinton, and set up this group called Teneo Strategies, a consulting firm. And apparently Huma was doing a lot of business for the Clinton Foundation. Now, there are laws that say when you are on the taxpayer dollar, you do the taxpayer's business, you don't use your taxpayer-funded office, equipment, phone lines, anything to conduct business anywhere else. You do that on your own time. And so Grassley is calling for an investigation into this, because we're not talking about somebody who just inadvertently picked the wrong phone line one or twice. We're talking about a continuous pattern of disregard for the rules. Okay. Now, interesting article here about the slow death political of Chris Christie. And they're talking about an incident that happened at the Monmouth Racetrack in New Jersey. The crowd was there to cheer home the state horse American Pharoah after the Triple Crown winner, after one another race, and Chris Christie stepped up there to get his picture taken, and 61,000 people started booing him. So the American people are waking up to just what sort of human beings we have that seek these positions of power. And we're hardly alone here in the United States of America. There's a reason why I have politics corruption under the same theme heading. They're joined at the hip. You can't have one without the other, unless you're sitting on top of the politician, which is a good way to run a country, by the way. The German justice minister has fired their country's top prosecutor over this ongoing treason probe. No details yet, but apparently there's a big shake-up there as well. The former Brazilian chief of staff, Jose Dirceu, has been arrested regarding the Petrobras scandal with the state-owned oil company, and they're cracking down over there. Now, over at Carlyle, their CEO, Matthew Greer, he's the CEO of Miami-based Carlyle Development Group, along with Lloyd Boggio, founder of the company, have been charged with stealing millions of dollars from the U.S. Affordable Housing Program. Apparently, they ran a fraud scheme by padding the cost of inner-city housing projects to qualify for larger federal tax credits, and then they just shared the excess profits among themselves. You got to pay for all of this. Now, looking at all of these stories, I think there's something we need to consider. If large-scale corruption inevitably follows large-scale government and large-scale corporations, maybe the world would be better off without large-scale government or large-scale corporations. I think that's a direction we need to be going, and it's another argument against this idea of a global economy or a global government, the New World Order. Alrighty, now about a year ago, there was a video appeared on C-SPAN that called attention to the fact that all three of the towers that collapsed on 9/11 appeared to show signs of controlled demolition, especially building number 7, which was never hit by an airplane, and especially because BBC and Fox and CNN all reported its collapse roughly 20 minutes before it actually happened. Okay. This video about the demolition is now the most popular video on the C-SPAN website, with over 400,000 views, and I would suspect even these numbers are being artificially deflated, based on similar videos over at YouTube that have viewerships in the millions. And we've caught YouTube cheating down viewership numbers to keep things out of the top 10 that the government wants kept under wraps. Now, speaking of documentaries, not too long ago, Russia Today put out this amazingly well-made documentary about the shoot-down of Malaysian Airlines Flight 17. The Dutch Safety Review Board, the so-called independent international committee looking into this, has now asked for Russia Today's assistance in their probe as to what's going on. They want to see more of the material that was collected for the documentary. And it looks like the momentum to blame Putin, blame Russia is starting to stumble on this one. And let's be honest, at this point, the safest course of action is to assume that everything said by government and the corporate media is a line until proven opposite. We'll be right back after these commercials. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. Now, back on June 9th, this Islamic militant leader, high-ranking, Nasser al-Wahasi, was killed in a U.S. drone strike, which the U.S. government held up as a success in the war on terror, huzzah, huzzah, huzzah. It has since come out that the U.S. didn't actually know the guy was there, because the U.S. is continuing a policy of what they call signature drone strikes. In other words, they're launching drones at targets without knowing who they actually are, solely on the basis of how they behave. Are they acting suspicious? Kill them. That is the policy of the U.S. drone strike forces. We don't know if this is a good person or a bad person. They just look nasty. So we'll kill them. That's basically it. The CIA that was in control of this drone strike had no idea this guy was there. They're just killing anybody who looks wrong. By the way, here in the United States of America, when the police pull you over because you look wrong, it's called profiling. And now we have the CIA, which apparently doesn't actually know where the bad people are, is carrying out extrajudicial execution on the basis of profiling. Beard, turban, yeah, he's got to be Al-Qaeda. Let's just kill him. It's amazing. Now, the former executive director of the CIA, Alvin Buzzy Krongard. Now, he was the guy who was linked to some of the strange stock dealings during 9/11. But apparently he's basically come out in a recent interview saying that, yeah, in his opinion, waterboarding is torture. And certainly that was the opinion of the Spanish Inquisition that used it. It was the opinion of the Japanese who used it. In fact, at the end of World War II, there were Japanese military officers who were executed for waterboarding captured American pilots. Back then, the U.S. said, yes, it's torture, and we are going to hang these people. It's only when the U.S. started doing it to those Iraqis to find those Saddam nuclear weapons we were all told were there that they said, oh, it's not torture, it's enhanced interrogation. You shouldn't call it torture. You're being a disloyal American. If you call this torture, the terrorists will win. Well, now you've got the ex-executive director of the CIA saying, yeah, it's torture. So there's something that we all have to come to grips with. We live in a country whose government commits war crimes, violates treaties, and uses torture on innocent people to find weapons of mass destruction that don't actually exist. And that pretty much, I think, sums up Washington, D.C. So, now, there's an interesting article over at the Washington Examiner, and they're talking about this study that came out in the supposedly authoritative journal Ethnicities, talking about the Latinization of the United States of America, in which they're basically saying that by 2050, the United States will be 29% Latino. They will have political influence. There could even be a backlash against white people, the way we saw in Zimbabwe. Now, what this article fails to mention is that the vast majority of these Latinos are coming here illegally, but still takes the position that we have to absorb them economically. We have to make sure they're part of the middle class. No, we don't. If they come in this country legally, yeah, stepping across the border doesn't count. This article does confirm one of my favorite theories for this very bizarre open border amnesty policy, which is to dilute American sense of a national identity ahead of the dropping of the borders and the formation of this global government. If we're sort of confused what America is, we won't be standing up to protect America against these outside encroachments. And this also ties in with that very bizarre ruling that came out of the University of New Hampshire. You know, New Hampshire, the live free or die state. The university came out banning the word American as being racist because it excludes the South Americans. It doesn't include them in. When people say American, they mean citizens of the United States of America, and that can't be allowed. That's racist, to have a national sense of identity. So that tells us that that is the main agenda behind the open borders policy, whether it's here in the United States or all over Europe, to just blend everybody together in one crowd of everything mixed up. Heinz 57 Variety Society. So that nobody has a sense of a national identity. And have you seen how around the world political groups and nations that maintain a strong sense of nationhood, they're being smeared as, oh, they're nationalists, they're Nazis. Anybody who wants to put their country ahead of the rest of the world, they're being Nazis again. So yeah, that's the agenda. They're trying to destroy our identity, our sense of an identity as a citizen of the United States of America. That's what's going on. It's part of the necessary conditioning ahead of the New World Order. That we stop thinking of ourselves as Americans. I don't know what I am today. I have no idea. I have no clue. What do you think, Jose? Meanwhile, there's a story coming out of IntelliHub about this woman who's gone on this one-person protest campaign because her son was killed in traffic by an illegal alien who was driving illegally without a license while working illegally, and killed her son. And she's out there every day with a sign saying, my son was killed by an illegal immigrant. And the illegal immigrant got basically a slap on the wrist, not a second in jail, not a second in handcuffs, because we have to be treating these illegal immigrants specially. Get a much better deal than the legal citizens of this country. And this article points out something very important here, that Donald Trump is the only 2016 presidential candidate who is saying, we've got a major problem going on here. And because Fox News gets to set the questions for the upcoming GOP debate, I almost guarantee you there'll be very little commenting about immigration whatsoever. It's all going to be about bombing Iran and bombing Syria, and we've got to protect Israel, and we've got to do this, and gay marriage and abortion rights and all the rest of this other nonsense. By the way, Donald Trump is out there saying that he would rather shut down the government than give another penny of U.S. tax dollars to Planned Parenthood, and I'm 100% in agreement with him on that one. Do you know that if Planned Parenthood had been caught selling dead puppy parts, they would have been shut down immediately? Because puppies are so much more important in the greater scheme of things than human beings. By the way, you know those privatized for-profit immigration detention centers? Apparently they're making the illegal immigrants work for basically $1 a day. So even, the prison industrial complex. It's all over the country. All they got to do is find a reason to convict all of us of some kind of a crime, and we will be working in the prison factories for a couple of bucks a day. And then we'll be able to compete with those gosh darn Chinese. No, we won't. It's not just the wages and salaries that's the issue. It's regulatory compliance and the crippling debt structure on top of it all. And it doesn't matter how hard they crush down the lifestyles of the American people, they can never pay off that debt to the Federal Reserve because by design, debt created by private central banking exceeds the entire money supply. Those are your slave chains, and they're right in front of your eyes. Now, even Fox News was covering this. The city of Huntington Park, California, has appointed 2 illegal immigrants as commissioners on the city advisory boards. They're not even legal citizens yet, and they're being invited to set policy in the city government. I mean, talk about a blatant pander and a sellout. I'm one of those old-fashioned Americans, and yes, I'm going to use that word, University of New Hampshire. I don't want criminals in government at any level. And I think it's time that we, the American people, adopt a zero-tolerance policy on all of this nonsense going on. We have to take a break for our top-of-the-hour news. We'll be back with hour number 3 after these few words. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. Hour number 3. The phone lines are open, 877-300-7645, 877-300-7645. And basically, Fox News has announced they have finalized the lineup for Thursday's debate. It's not actually been published. Everybody is basically guessing. Obviously, Trump is going to be there. They couldn't figure out a way to get him out. Jeb Bush is going to be there. And, it just goes down the list from there. They're saying that Rick Perry may not have made the cut, but we don't have the final list out there just yet. At this point, this is really a 3-way race. Trump, Scott Walker, Jeb Bush, and the also-rans. Now, speaking of the also-rans, Hillary Clinton is dealing with another round of trouble. Federal Judge Emmett Sullivan has apparently reached his breaking point over all of this nonsense regarding Clinton's lies, delays, stalling tactics. He has basically issued an order to Hillary Clinton and 2 of her top aides. They will produce all State Department-related emails by this coming Friday or face a charge of perjury. That's it. So, we'll see what happens on that one. Hillary is in trouble, no doubt. Hillary made a lot of enemies in her rise to power. I'm one of them. So, now, moving internationally, remember what I said earlier in the show about how the rest of the world has picked up on just what the United States has been doing since the end of World War II to expand its empire without being obvious about it? Go into a country with these front groups that talk about democracy and human rights, and we're going to do good things for your people. And then they overthrow the legitimate government, put in U.S. puppet rule. Life for the people in that country goes downhill, and they don't understand it's because their country was taken over from outside. just like most Americans still don't understand the degree to which Israel is running Washington, D.C. So we're starting to hear in a lot of countries they're straining at the leashes. We're seeing a repeat of the decline and fall of the Roman Empire. After the Roman Empire lost 3 of its legions up in Germania, they were not able to police their empire, and the outlying provinces began to fragment and break away. And the loss of those tax revenues accelerated Rome's descent into unpayable debt and its eventual downfall. So over in the Philippines, Amara Lidasan, leader of the Filipino activist group Saura Bangsamoro, has been here in the United States to testify at the International People's Tribunal on Crimes Against the Filipino People, and in radio interviews is saying it is time for the United States to get out of the Philippines. Now, we're always hearing all this talk about Russia projecting power and China projecting power and going where they're not supposed to go. We talk about the Iranian threat, but if you look at a map of U.S. military bases around the world, you will understand it's the U.S. that's all over the globe with their little legions ready to unleash on the people of the conquered nations. There's a cartoon that's going around the net right now saying, of course Iran wants war. Look how close they built their nation to all those American military bases. Now, we've been talking about all these so-called color revolutions, these covert overthrows, Kiev, Armenia, Macedonia, Libya, Yemen, not going too well. And there's another one to add to the list of utter failures. Now, 6 months ago, there was a very quiet coup d'etat in Moldova that put a pro-Western junta into power. And after just 3 months in power, collapsed over a massive corruption scandal. And the current leadership in Moldova is scratching their chin and saying, you know, it really was a lot better before we aligned with the European Union and the U.S., and we're going to go on back to being friends with Russia. So I don't know what the U.S. is going to do about that. Oh, there's a cruel tyrant in Moldova. We've got to go in and we bring them human rights and democracy and the American way of life, which is do what you're told and nobody gets hurt. Seems to be these days at any rate. Now, we're still seeing the after effects of this whole kerfuffle over the French-built Mistral helicopter carriers for Russia. Russia ordered France to build the hulls. Russia sent over a bunch of equipment that they had installed. France then reneged on the deal at demands of the U.S. government. They're still suing each other back and forth. And Russia is now sending people to France to retrieve the Russian-built equipment that was installed on these Mistral helicopter carriers. So any chance that France is going to be able to resell these to recover their losses is now gone, because without the Russian-supplied equipment, it's basically 3 large floating chunks of iron, steel actually. Without that Russian equipment, there's nothing there. There's just 3 empty hulls. All right, we're going to grab ourselves a phone call. Mark in Texas, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, how you doing, Mike? Mike, I just got 2 questions for you today.
Sure.
I'll take them off here if you want. One is, how bad really is Iran? You know, they're saying, oh, they're these monsters, this, that. They're not really, are they really like ISIS? Or do other religions have rights there and all that? And the other thing I wanted to ask you about is Kazakhstan. Is Kazakhstan still considered a part of Russia? Or is it, and who's it, if it's not, who's it really friendly with and allied with? And I'll take my answers off.
All right. Well, thank you very much for the phone call. The answer to your first question is no, Iran is not like you're being told it is. They're not all a bunch of religious wackos running around the place and doing Sharia law. In fact, not too long ago, I found several pages of photos of the nightlife of Tehran. And frankly, you couldn't tell the difference between those photos and the nightlife in, say, Paris or London or New York. Just young people out there dancing. You know, the women are dressed, you know, in modern contemporary fashions. There's a wonderful video out there, Please Don't Tell Mom I'm in Tehran, that was shot by a Jewish documentary filmmaker who went in there and just talked to people, and they're just like everybody else. They're trying to run their business. They're trying to take care of their families. They're not wacko crazy fanatics. I mean, it's like, you know, the kind of propaganda we're seeing about Iran is if somebody came into the United States, went down to the deep south, and made a video about the snake handler, strychnine drinker, fanatical Christians, and said, this is what all Americans are. That's how biased it is. And I've actually known a few Iranians in my life. Very pleasant to be with. Nowhere near as pushy and obnoxious as, well, some other people I could mention. They're very polite. They have a strong tradition of hospitality towards strangers. You know, and again, Iran has not launched a war of aggression against another country in over 200 years. It is not their nature. Now, as far as Kazakhstan is concerned, they're loosely allied with the Russian republics. They're an area of eventual contention with the U.S. as it seeks to encircle and sort of wall off Russia. But at the moment, they're leaning more Russia than the U.S. I think if they had more oil in the ground, they might be a bone of contention, but not quite yet as far as I can tell. Okay, the U.S. is still having to buy rocket engines from Russia. 2 more of the RD-181 rockets for the Antares have been delivered. It's a contract previously signed, which the U.S. and Russia are complying with, unlike the French contract for the Mistral ships. But the bottom line is the U.S. can't build rocket engines anymore. We've forgotten how, as we sink into the new dark ages. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. And there is apparently some kind of a major disruption to cellular service over on the eastern side of the United States, stretching from Indiana to Alabama, bits of Missouri, out into the Carolinas. It's affecting all of the cell phone providers. So for those of you trying to hear my radio show over your cell phone in that part of the country, I will talk much louder for the next hour. We now have the official lineup for the Thursday night Fox News GOP debate. The final list is out, and the wailing and gnashing of teeth is about to commence. Obviously, Donald Trump is in the number 1 spot. He gets the center stage. They really couldn't figure out a way to get him out of there. And he will be flanked by Jeb Bush and Scott Walker, who are on the number 2, number 3 place in all of the polls. The rest of the stage will be Senators Mark Rubio of Florida, Ted, I was born in Canada, Cruz, Rand Paul of Kentucky, former Arkansas Governor Mike Huckabee, Chris Christie of New Jersey, John Kasich of Ohio, and Ben Carson, who's a retired neurosurgeon, is doing very well out there. Rick Perry didn't make the cut. Neither did Carly Fiorini. Now, Fox News is going to have an earlier debate with all of these other people. It's politically called the kiddie table, and it is the kiss of death. And we can expect that many of those people who didn't make that top 10 are going to be announcing that they're ducking out of the race and offering to barter their support to whoever they think is going to win in exchange for favors down the road. That's how this situation gets going. Now then, we were talking about weapons. We were talking about Russia is going over to France to retrieve all of the technology they put on the Mistral ships. No doubt France has already reverse engineered as much of it as they can, and the CIA. And I guess Russia doesn't care because they're not in a rush to do it. They're not going to be there till September. So I guess whatever they were putting on the Mistral, they figure it's such old stuff, it doesn't really matter anymore. Now, this is the electronics that is firmly attached to the ship itself. Command and control, who knows what all else. I'm sure all the really classified stuff was never over there to begin with. This brings us to the subject of the F-35. Looking at an article over in the Independent in Great Britain, and they're talking about how not too long ago Great Britain was going to order 150 of the F-35s. To be the world's most advanced stealth fighter jet, was going to be the replacement for the Harrier, and now Great Britain has actually only ordered 8 of them to date, out of speculation of 150. It's a boondoggle. And according to this article over in The Independent, the F-35 is on its way to becoming one of history's biggest white elephants. And cost overruns, delays, things do not work. It's junk. Now, possibly as a PR stunt to try and offset all the negative press, there is one squadron of F-35s cleared for active combat. This comes out of the Marine Corps. The Marine Commandant General Joseph Dunford announced last Friday the Marines have put a squadron of F-35 Joint Strike Fighters on combat status. Doesn't mean they're going into combat. Remember, the software for the cannon isn't expected to be delivered until 2019. The helmet control fire system still does not work. The transparent aircraft vision system, they can't get it to line up. And the shared targeting information within the squadron, software is still producing false targets. It can't synchronize everything. It can't correlate it. But we're going to say it's on combat status, and we'll fly it out to the air shows and show it off, and it looks really cool. Because American weapon procurement is all about making money. As I reported in the last segment, the U.S. still can't produce its own large-scale rocket engines. They're still having to use this contract with Russia. We've forgotten how to do this stuff. We've had a couple of major embarrassments with U.S.-built rockets in recent months. And we're getting ready to go to war against Russia and China with this junk, and it's very expensive junk, and it looks really cool, but it is still junk. And that's the bottom line there. All right, so let's get on to this whole Planned Parenthood situation. There was a very interesting story last week where Planned Parenthood had succeeded in going to court and getting a judge to issue a restraining order against publication of one of the videos that has been made by this anti-abortion group. And apparently the rationale was the video was made at Planned Parenthood's one of their annual meetings, which Planned Parenthood said, this is private, it's not meant for the public, and therefore we have a right to block the video. And it's a dubious argument, but the judge went along with it. It turns out the judge is an Obama appointee and a major campaign donor. It's all buddy-buddy here, because what we're seeing with Obama and Planned Parenthood, and for that matter, anything else, this is a man who can never admit mistake. Whether it's Obamacare, human-caused global warming, Planned Parenthood support, immigration policy, and he's the head of a government which institutionally can never admit error or failed policy or change course. Obama's out there saying that all these videos that have gone out there, oh, they're just fakes. You don't want to believe those. It's a conspiracy. See, Obama's now a conspiracy theorist. Somebody's making these videos to make Planned Parenthood look bad. And as I mentioned earlier, if Planned Parenthood had been caught selling dead puppy parts, can you imagine the hue and cry? They would have been shut down immediately. But it's just human beings. They don't count. They're not worth anything. Whatever. On the SRN News Break, if you were listening, there is a new video out in which they're talking about how Planned Parenthood literally altered the abortion method to harvest completed fetuses. This is a violation of federal law on a couple of different points. Out here in the real world, the exposure of what Planned Parenthood has been doing is having an effect. Coca-Cola has dropped their sponsorship of Planned Parenthood. Pepsi is now saying that they're not going to use any more of this supplied material for their flavoring or whatever they were doing with it. Xerox is canceling their funding. They don't want their names on Planned Parenthood. Same thing with Ford Motor Company. They want their names taken off the banners. They don't want to be associated with this. And they're smart not to want to be associated with this. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. Now, over in Idaho, there's been an interesting court decision regarding what are called the ag-gag laws. Now, these are laws that were passed to make it a crime for whistleblowers to go public with abuses carried out by corporate farm entities in terms of the treatment of the livestock or anything else they were doing, using illegal hormones or the rest of it. And it's basically a way of shutting down whistleblowers who are reporting on these misbehaviors, which shouldn't be happening anyway if the FDA and USDA were doing their job, but they're not. And a court in Idaho has just said ag-gag laws are unconstitutional infringements of our right to freedom of speech. If we're seeing something that a company is doing that is unsafe, unnecessarily cruel, unhealthy, dangerous, we have a right to go public with it. And this is probably going to be cited as precedent to overturn the ag-gag laws that we're seeing in other states. I mean, there are states where you can be arrested and thrown in jail just for taking a picture of a corporate farm from outside on public property. That's how ridiculous it was. All right, we're going to take a phone call here. Joey in New Jersey. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha, Mike. Just real quick. If Ted Cruz is not eligible to run for president, being that he's a Canadian citizen, how come Fox is giving him a spot on the dais when there's so many other potential legitimate...
Well, you're going to have to ask Fox News about that one. I mean, Ted Cruz's defenders are trying to equate the question of his being born in Canada with the birth certificate controversy regarding Barack Obama, but they're really two completely different situations. Barack Obama was born here in Hawaii. The reason for the fake birth certificate was to hide the fact that his biological father was a gentleman named Frank Marshall Davis, and they look a lot alike, if you've been to my article on the subject. And that was a very common thing in the 1960s. A lot of girls were having love childs. Obama's one of them. And rather than go through the long and costly process of a formal adoption, women who had a love child when they got married, they would simply ask for a new birth certificate with the corrected father's name, in this case Barack Obama Sr. That's all that there is to that. In the case of Ted Cruz, he was born in Canada of an American woman and a Cuban father. Then they moved to the United States of America. Ted Cruz is a U.S. citizen. His father became naturalized, okay, but he's not a natural-born American citizen. And the GOP is saying, well, they're going to go with him. Fox News, you have to ask why they're not paying attention to this. But it was amazing, the hue and cry they made over Obama's birth certificate, and now when it's their own guy, it's no big deal. You guys are just being tinfoil hat conspiracy kooks. Frankly, it doesn't look like Cruz is going to get very far, even though he did make the cut on the Fox News debate. I don't see him as being a serious challenger to either Walker, Bush, or Trump. He may be angling for vice presidency, which would be legal for him, being born in Canada anyway, unless the real president died in office, and then there's a whole constitutional issue that's going to have to be dealt with. But the fact of the matter is that Ted Cruz is not a natural-born citizen. They're trying to get away with it by saying that the phrase natural-born citizen, even though it has a well-understood common definition, it's never been legally defined by the courts, and until the courts define it, it doesn't really matter because we're not allowed to think for ourselves.
Very good. Okay, that pretty much answers that. A while back I called you and I asked for a recommendation on how to answer the other side. And my main interrogator, one of my drivers, referred to me as being delusional because I speak so much about your show and about the articles that I read. And obviously, we don't speak anymore.
All right. Well, obviously he's not your driver anymore. Yeah, I get a flood of emails these days from people I knew 10, 15, 20 years ago saying, man, we thought you were a nutcase, but it turned out you were right. But there is always going to be that segment of the population that are digging in their psychological heels because they can't admit to themselves that they were wrong or made fools of. And more importantly, they can't live with the moral compromises they made to go on supporting the power structure. Back when the torture scandal first surfaced, I said the big problem here is once you step over that line where you're okay with torture because the government says it's necessary, then you're trapped. You can never go back and say, I think the government was wrong, because then you have to say, I think I was wrong to support this government and to support torture. Most people don't want to do that. And so they literally become the most fanatical of the supporters of the dictator. You know, the Führer is always right. No matter what he does, he is always right, and we are always right, and you are always wrong. And from there we get world wars.
Now, one other thought that you touch close to it when you give them the factors, the Robert Kennedy factor.
Yeah.
And the first thought that came to my mind, being a dot connector, was all of a sudden you don't hear anything about this El Chapo character that escaped. I'm wondering if they're training him up in case Trump does run away with this thing.
Well, I tend to disagree with that line of reasoning because, first of all, there's no motive for El Chapo to come after a presidential candidate in this country. Second, a successful assassination, you're going to have multiple players and multiple shooters, and if El Chapo is involved, they're going to have a completely different patsy on which to drop the blame. Maybe another Sirhan so they can say, ooh, it's the Palestinians who did it. Go hate the Palestinians, which is what they did with the Robert Kennedy assassination.
Okay. All right, Mike, you're doing a hell of a job. Keep it up. I'm with you.
All right, thank you very much there. And, I mean, Trump's got center stage at the debate, and Fox is going to be working really hard to keep the debate away from the topics where Trump is strong. But Trump has succeeded in tapping into this incredible discontent in the American people. We're sick and tired of politics as we have seen it for the last 20 years. We're sick and tired of business as usual, where the rich are allowed to get richer at the expense of everybody else. And all of a sudden, Donald Trump, for all of his faults, okay, and he does have them, he represents something that's different. He's a maverick. In many ways, I think we could describe him as a reactionary candidate, where everybody's hopping on board him just because he's not cut from the same cloth as all those other candidates. He hasn't sold himself to AIPAC or Big Pharmaceutical or whatever. He's got his own money. That makes him independent, and he's stirring up the pot. He's talking about the things that really are a problem in this nation. Illegal immigration, Planned Parenthood. And I think a lot of people are just instinctively saying, okay, we're going to get the straight dope here. And I think they're responding to that. All righty, getting on back to the story here. Now, the other day we were talking about Hurricane Guillermo out here in Hawaii. It's now down to a tropical storm. The storm track is now shifting rapidly to the north. It's going to miss us. We're not going to get anything at all that got some rain on the Big Island. And I want to make a point here. 2 days ago, the computer models showed Guillermo headed right toward Hawaii. Today it's projected to miss us by hundreds of miles. Now, obviously, these computer models are not very good. Yet Barack Obama, in his speech yesterday, is out there relying on computer models to prove we're all going to die a horrible death unless we pay carbon taxes. He was out there saying, the computer models show we're going to have more hurricanes if we don't implement taxes on carbon. Now, this is a hard claim to support when they can't even predict the hurricanes that we have, what they're going to do just 48 hours from now. And after that Obamacare debacle, you would think Obama would be a little more cautious about resting his agendas on computer software. We're going to take a break. We'll be right back. Hi, America. Welcome back to the show here. So basically, yesterday Obama came out with his little speech. Everybody's going to die without my clean power plan, so ignore the fear-mongerers. That's the new thing. You know, anybody who's questioning human-caused global warming, they're not skeptics, they're deniers. They're fear-mongers. They're trying to make you afraid the government is lying to you. Actually, the government's done a very good job of that themselves. They don't need our help anymore. Okay, now, interestingly enough, John Stossel had a video. We linked to it on the front page of WhatReallyHappened.com, in which he basically talks about the global warming superstars. The personalities who are put out there to convince us the world is getting warmer and we must accept carbon taxes and control over our lives to save the earth. And he basically says you've got Bill Nye, the science guy, whose college degree is actually in mechanical engineering. You've got Neil deGrasse Tyson, who to this date refuses any interviews in which he might have to answer questions about his promotion of global warming. And finally, of course, Al Gore himself, who is not a scientist, in fact got barely passing grades in his science classes. And we have him on videotape saying the temperature of the Earth's core is millions of degrees. He's off by a few zeros, I might add. And Stossel makes a valid point. Human-caused global warming is not being sold with science because the science isn't there. It's being sold with a personality cult. We've got star power. If you want to hang out with Al Gore, you will believe human-caused global warming. The reality is, as we reported last week, the most recent survey of professional climatologists who've been working in this field for decades shows there is no consensus. This 97% consensus was made up out of thin air. In fact, when IPCC came out with that list of names of people who supported human-caused global warming, they got an immediate reaction from a whole bunch of scientists who said, I didn't want my name on that. I didn't agree to that. Then it came out that a lot more of the names that were on this list of scientists in support of global warming weren't even scientists at all. Just anybody they could find around the office. Does this sound good to you? All right, you're now an expert. You're on the list. It's a fraud from top to bottom. We live in an age of lies, and they are endless. Now, getting on over to the CDC, and remember, the CDC is not a government agency. It is a private, for-profit corporation. It does tens of millions of dollars business with the medical industrial complex. In fact, it could be argued it is part of the medical industrial complex. So now we have a congressman is out there saying that it is time to investigate the CDC over this issue of tampering with the MMR study that supposedly proved there was no link with autism. I think tampering is too gentle a word. The CDC took the negative data from their research, the data that did show the link, and they just threw it in the shredder. It was just about a year ago, Dr. William Thompson, who was a senior scientist at the CDC and one of the authors of this study, got himself a lawyer and said, this is a fraud. The CDC's study saying there is no link between the MMR vaccine and autism was a manufactured fraud. He knew because he was part of the fraud. Because we've got to make people buy the vaccines here. And by the way, we link to this very bizarre video. It's over on YouTube. This is a video that was made of a presentation at the Pentagon in which they're talking about creating vaccines that will modify your behavior, that will make you more trusting of the government, that will make you want to believe what you're told to believe. They're talking about mind control with vaccines here. And this video goes back a few years. And you have to start wondering, is all this sudden rush to make vaccines mandatory? Is it really about illness and disease? Probably not, because the people who get the vaccine seem to get the illness. Or is there something else going on? We don't know what's in that needle. We don't know what's in that needle. Now, the U.S. government has announced they're beginning human trials in Africa of a genetically modified Ebola vaccine. And they're going to start the trials over there in Africa, which, first of all, the potential for mistakes with genetic modification, especially with a highly unstable RNA filovirus like Ebola, which is constantly mutating. And we have that other consequence that the present outbreak of Ebola in Africa is thought to have been triggered by human trials of an Ebola vaccine at the Kenema Clinic. And we documented the paper trail, who was paying the money, and they were testing a vaccine against what they called a weaponized Ebola. And all of a sudden, Ebola erupted all around where they were conducting the trials. Now, speaking of reckless mistakes, if that's indeed what it was, you've been hearing about this outbreak of Legionnaire's fever. There have already been deaths against it. Apparently, the Bronx was sprayed with an experimental bacteria to work against West Nile fever by killing the mosquitoes that carry it, which sounds like a really good idea. But the strange timing about spraying the Bronx with this bacteria and then all of a sudden everybody's coming down with Legionnaire's fever. Scientists have a bad habit of conducting their experiments in these little isolated boxes to control all the variables. And they say, oh, this works in here. And then they very recklessly start deploying the stuff out in the real world, where whatever they're working with starts interacting with other organisms against which it was never tested. Scientists don't look for things that might go wrong. They just want to get decision support that it's okay to sell a product. Remember when GMO corn first came out? Completely unexpected. The stalks of the corn plants were much tougher than the natural varieties. The corn farmers had to buy Kevlar-belted tires for their tractors. And it's okay, Kevlar-belted tires, it's not a big deal, other than nobody expected that to happen. They weren't looking for side effects, places where the genetic modification changes the organism elsewhere than the desired section. DNA is very self-referential, crosses back and forth all over. That's how so much information is stored in such a tiny, tiny space. Meanwhile, in the world of GMO, those farmers who did not buy into Monsanto's GMO products are seeing record profits. Farmers whose fields are natural and organic, it's a seller's market. They're commanding huge, huge prices because people want organic, non-GMO food. And meanwhile, of course, members of the U.S. Congress are out there being paid to deny what you want. They're being paid to say, no, you will not be allowed to eat the food you want to eat. You will eat the food the corporations want you to eat, want to sell to you to eat. That's what you will do. Because you're really far too stupid to understand the issues here of how much money I'm getting from my next year's campaign. But that's basically what it is. We have 64 nations around the world that have complete GMO bans. The U.S. government, the Congress, is already looking at a bill that will not only forbid GMO labeling, but forbid local communities and states from banning GMO crops. They've totally sold out. We're supposed to be a nation of the people, by the people, and for the people. Not of the money junkies, by the money junkies, and for the money junkies, but that's what Congress is doing. These GMO companies want to make money by selling you potentially unhealthy, dangerous food, and Congress is okay with that. I'm sure that Congress isn't eating the GMO. We know that Monsanto's own company cafeterias will not serve GMO. This is just for the masses, for the Eloi to eat. For the plebes, for the serf class. We'll feed them this junk crud food here, and they'll be happy with it. There's the music. Time for me to get out of here, get something useful done with the rest of the day. We will be back tomorrow here on the Genesis Communication Network. Until then, stay safe, stay skeptical, stay informed, make good choices. Go ahead and be angry. It's time. You're due. You've earned it. We'll be back tomorrow. Aloha, America.